Have you ever noticed that you are no longer truly living, but constantly observing yourself through the eyes of others? Sometimes it is only a very subtle feeling where you think carefully before you speak, adjust your emotions to seem appropriate, and weigh every choice to see whether it will be accepted. You still do everything as usual, yet somewhere inside a part of you always steps back, waiting for a reaction from the world before daring to move forward. Carl Jung believed there is a very important moment in psychological life when a person grows tired of always orienting outward, not tired from failure, but from constantly measuring themselves by the world. And that moment is not a sign that you are losing direction, but a signal that it is time to turn back to yourself. This video does not teach you to ignore the world or cut yourself off from people. It simply guides you through a deep journey from living by the external gaze toward focusing only on yourself. If this title touches something familiar within you, perhaps you are ready for a different way of living, where you no longer need the world's validation to know that you are on the right path. Stay until the end, because what you are searching for outside may be precisely what has been waiting for you inside all along. Number 1. Living by the external gaze, the origin of alienation. There is a very familiar stage in human life when you begin to feel that your worth rises and falls according to other people's eyes. A compliment lifts your mood for the whole day, silence makes you restless, and a single unfriendly look is enough to make you doubt your entire path. Jung argued that the moment you measure your self-worth by the external gaze is the moment you lose the deepest anchor of your psychological life, not because others are wrong, but because you have handed the authority to define yourself to something outside your control. As Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Like a person walking through a forest without a compass, you look at where the crowd is going and turn left simply because everyone turns left, not because it is the right path, but because you have no other way of knowing the direction, a state Jung called living by the collective map. It is precisely here that alienation begins, which in Jungian psychology is not about living immorally, but about living far from your true self while believing you are being appropriate and up to standard. You choose a field because it is admired, and a lifestyle because it is praised, until slowly you feel empty and exhausted, as if you are living a life that does not belong to you, the first whisper of the neglected self. I once met a man in his 30s who worked non-stop and was always praised as diligent and successful, yet whenever no one needed him, he felt empty and anxious, staying busy out of fear of that feeling returning. He constantly compared himself with people his age, always feeling slower and not enough, never realizing that each comparison was a quiet denial of his own unique process. To focus only on yourself is not selfishness, but an invitation to return to the inner anchor you have neglected, and to ask what truly has meaning for you even if no one acknowledges it. The moment you realize you have lived too long through the eyes of others is not a collapse, but a gentle call from within to stop, return, and listen to what wants to live through you. Number 2, persona, the cost of wanting to be accepted. There's a very subtle moment when you begin to realize that you have lived too long through the eyes of others, and a quiet question arises. So who exactly has been living in my place all these years? According to Jung, the answer is often not other people, but the persona, the social mask we learn to wear from a very early age in order to adapt, to be accepted, and to avoid being excluded. The persona was not created to harm us, but to help us survive, and the problem begins only when we forget that it is a role and believe it is who we truly are. The persona is a tool, not the essence, and the fear of being judged gradually turns it into a prison. At first, you only want to avoid conflict, until over time, you feel you can no longer deviate from the role. The persona no longer protects you from the world, it protects the world from your true self. As Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." A friend of mine works in a creative environment, always described as pleasant, professional, a perfect fit, knowing exactly what to present so as not to make anyone uncomfortable. But in a very private conversation, she admitted that she no longer knows what she truly enjoys, because every time she wants to do something different, she immediately hears a series of questions. Will others find it strange? Will they be disappointed? Will they judge me? She is not living badly, but she has lived too long within the persona, and her anxiety comes not from failure, but from having no place left to take the mask off. To focus only on yourself here does not mean abandoning all social roles, but beginning to recognize what is persona and what is self. When you loosen the persona even slightly, anxiety appears. Yet Jung believed this is not a sign you are going the wrong way, but that you are touching truth. So if while watching this day, you suddenly realize that you have lived very correctly but not truly lived, leave a comment sharing your story, even just a fragment of truth you have carried for a long time, because sometimes daring to write it down is the first moment the persona begins to be set aside. Number 2, persona, the cost of wanting to be accepted. There's a very subtle moment when you begin to realize that you have lived too long through the eyes of others, and a quiet question arises. So who exactly has been living in my place all these years? According to Jung, the answer is often not other people, but the persona, the social mask we learn to wear from a very early age in order to adapt, to be accepted, and to avoid being excluded. The persona was not created to harm us, but to help us survive, and the problem begins only when we forget that it is a role and believe it is who we truly are. The persona is a tool, not the essence, and the fear of being judged gradually turns it into a prison. At first, you only want to avoid conflict, until over time, you feel you can no longer deviate from the role. The persona no longer protects you from the world, it protects the world from your true self. As Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." A friend of mine works in a creative environment, always described as pleasant, professional, a perfect fit, knowing exactly what to present so as not to make anyone uncomfortable. But in a very private conversation, she admitted that she no longer knows what she truly enjoys, because every time she wants to do something different, she immediately hears a series of questions. Will others find it strange? Will they be disappointed? Will they judge me? She is not living badly, but she has lived too long within the persona, and her anxiety comes not from failure, but from having no place left to take the mask off. To focus only on yourself here does not mean abandoning all social roles, but beginning to recognize what is persona and what is self. When you loosen the persona even slightly, anxiety appears. Yet Jung believed this is not a sign you are going the wrong way, but that you are touching truth. So if while watching this day, you suddenly realize that you have lived very correctly but not truly lived, leave a comment sharing your story, even just a fragment of truth you have carried for a long time, because sometimes daring to write it down is the first moment the persona begins to be set aside. Number 4, withdrawing projection. Who is really judging you? There is a moment after you have moved beyond comparison when you realize you are no longer chasing anyone, yet the fear of being judged has not disappeared. You are no longer openly competing, yet a look, a comment, or even silence can still make you feel scrutinized. According to Jung, this is not a contradiction, but a sign that you are standing at a deeper layer of the journey back to yourself, the layer where projection has not yet been withdrawn. Jung believed most obsessions with being judged originate not in the external world, but in unacknowledged parts of your inner life. He called this projection When a feeling is too difficult to accept, the psyche assigns it to someone else, and we believe they are judging us when it is the voice of our own inner shadow. As Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So when you fear being judged, ask who it is that does not allow you to make mistakes, who keeps whispering that you are not good enough, because very often it is not anyone outside, but the shadow, the repressed part of the psyche. Let me tell you about a woman who was constantly worried that her colleagues did not respect her, feeling that every question carried doubt and every feedback was criticism. But when she began to work deeply with herself, she realized that within her lived a strong belief that she was not good enough, a belief never spoken aloud yet always present. And because she could not accept it as something that needed healing, she projected it outward, believing that others were thinking it for her. When she finally confronted her own self-doubt, the outside world seemed less judgmental, not because others changed, but because the projection was withdrawn. Jung saw this long before any research, that the world you fear often mirrors what you have not yet dared to face within yourself. When you integrate the shadow, external voices lose their power, because you no longer need others to carry your inner conflicts, and you can hear criticism without collapsing. To focus only on yourself here is to reclaim the energy you have unconsciously given away, because each worry about being judged projects it outward, and asking which part of you is speaking brings it home. And if in the silence you no longer ask who is looking at you, but what within you is being reflected, leave a single word in the comments, mirror, because daring to recognize the mirror is enough for the journey to begin shifting. Number 5, solitude, a necessary condition to encounter the self. At the moment you stop believing that all eyes are focused on you, life slows down. The noises that once crowded your mind recede, and in that settling silence, you begin to touch a state long avoided, the feeling of solitude. According to Jung, this is not a step backward, but a sign you are moving closer to your inner center, because solitude is not abandonment or social failure, but a sacred space where the soul can finally speak. As Jung wrote, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When you have lived too long under the gaze of others, you rarely hear what is important to yourself. And withdrawing from the crowd is not escape, but a necessary condition for inner truth to appear, which is why people cling to busyness to avoid that quiet inner space. Like a lake in the early morning whose surface ripples and reflects distorted images whenever the wind blows, your inner world only becomes clear when the wind calms and the surface grows still, allowing the image beneath to appear. Silence does not create the true voice. It only allows that voice to be heard. A very typical example is the journey of Steve Jobs during the period when he left Apple in the 1980s. When he was pushed out of the very company he founded, Jobs entered a phase that outwardly looked like failure, but was inwardly a profound withdrawal as he slowed down, traveled to India, practiced meditation, and reflected on what truly mattered to him beyond fame. It was during this solitary period that many of his core ideas about design, simplicity, and intuition took shape. And when he returned to Apple, he worked from a clearer inner center, a classic example of solitude becoming the space where the self is restructured. What makes people afraid of solitude is not being alone, but what surfaces when no one is left to distract them. The avoided questions, the true desires, the unnamed sadness once covered by social life. To focus only on yourself does not mean cutting off relationships, but withdrawing attention long enough to re-establish inner order, since true solitude does not distance you from people. It lets you be far more present when you return. And when you can be alone without feeling lack, you return to the world not to be seen, but to be present, walking in alignment with the deepest rhythm of yourself. Number 6, from extroverted ego to a disciplined inner life. According to Jung, This is the turning point where a person stops being pulled outward and begins to build a disciplined inner life, not the discipline of force or proving, but one born from a deep inner need, what Jung called inner necessity. When the extroverted ego leads, people act to be seen and favorably compared, and life's rhythm is dictated by external feedback. But when action arises from inner necessity, you act because something inside demands to be realized, even if no one sees, praises, or understands. As Jung wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Like a tree whose roots grow deep and invisible underground, your inner life is not impressive to look at. Yet those roots decide whether you withstand the storms. Because if you only feed the leaves and shape the canopy, the tree seems fine until the first storm arrives. Jungian discipline is not about making the canopy of your life more impressive, but about returning daily to nourish those invisible roots in silence. I once met a man named Leon, who worked in finance, accustomed to a fast pace and goals tied to recognition. And after burnout, he decided to slow down. Strangely, he did not rest completely, nor launch a dramatic self-improvement plan. He simply began waking a little earlier each morning to read, write a few lines of reflection, and focus on the single most important task of the day without telling anyone. No one praised him, and no one knew. Yet Leon grew calmer, clearer in his decisions, and less swept up by pressure, because he did not become better than others, but more aligned with himself, and from that inner anchor, external effectiveness followed as a consequence, not a goal. Jung said it in the language of depth psychology, that psychic energy flows over the long term only when it serves the process of becoming oneself. To focus only on yourself here is to set a new order of priorities, investing in yourself not to surpass others, but to avoid betraying what you know to be true. You may do less and move slower, yet each step carries weight, the discipline no one sees, the quiet accumulation that supports your entire life. And if these lines touch you in a calm way, enough to make you pause and look more deeply at your own rhythm of living, press like on this video, not as an external response, but as a small sign that you are choosing to listen to something very real inside. Number 7, withdrawing energy from the world. Stop seeking validation. So what happens when you have built a disciplined inner life, yet still feel as though you are waiting for the world to respond? You are no longer chasing comparison, but somewhere inside remains a subtle movement, the wish to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be told you are on the right path. According to Jung, this is not a failure of the inward journey, but the next stage of ego maturation, the moment when energy truly begins to withdraw from the world. When the ego is immature, it needs reflection to know that it exists, using praise and attention as mirrors. But as it matures, it stands on inner unity, where value comes not from how many recognize you, but from a deep sense that what you live, think, and do are no longer in conflict. Many confuse focusing on yourself with egoism, but withdrawing energy from the world is not turning away from others, only no longer using them as the source of your worth. Because while you still need validation, part of your psychic energy keeps flowing outward, waiting to be returned as praise. I once knew the story of Anna, a woman who had moved beyond comparison and was no longer afraid of judgment, with a solid inner life. Yet whenever she shared a personal project, she still unconsciously checked for feedback, a part of her asking whether it was good enough to be seen. When she noticed that subtle movement and stopped, not by forcing herself to be indifferent, but by returning to the inner feeling of the work itself, she no longer rose or fell with other people's reactions, and the work remained the same. But her emotions were lighter, because she did not lose motivation. She lost dependence. As Jung wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to fully accept yourself means you no longer need anyone else to bear witness to your value. Frightening for an immature ego nourished by feedback, but liberation for an ego that has passed through enough experience. Like a stream of water that spreads everywhere when you constantly seek validation, your psychic energy, once withdrawn, does not disappear, but seeps into the ground and nourishes the roots. And though no one sees the water underground, it determines whether the tree survives the drought. Emotional independence does not mean needing no one, but no longer being shaken by whether others respond, so that you receive praise without excitement and criticism without collapse, because the center of regulation has shifted from outside to inside. When you reach this point in the journey, you may realize that focusing only on yourself was never an act of rebellion nor a cold withdrawal, but a very quiet return, a silent shift of the center of living from outside to inside. No longer needing the world to confirm who you are, no longer needing the gaze of others as proof of your value, you begin to stand on a different foundation, inner coherence. From that point, life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes truer, because you no longer have to live fast to keep up with anyone, live correctly to be accepted, or live big to be seen. You only need to live in alignment with what is moving most deeply within you, and paradoxically, it is precisely when you stop seeking your place in the world that the world no longer has the power to shake you. If this video made you pause for a moment or touched a very familiar feeling you have never named, share it with someone who is also tired of living under the gaze of others. And if you want to continue the journey into inner life, subscribe to keep walking with us, not to become a better version for the world, but to no longer lose yourself within it.